Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 279 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. I am delighted to have you here again with us. My name is Pilar Orti. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, and today's episode is dedicated to co-working spaces. As you know, Virtual Not Distant, the company behind this show, well, we've been advocating for new ways of working, including remote work, for a while now, I think since 2016. But we do need to remember that remote work does not always mean working from home. And so, especially before the pandemic, co-working spaces played a crucial role in the adoption of remote work because it meant that people had more of a choice rather than just working from home or working from headquarters, the office, or indeed, especially for freelancers and entrepreneurs, it meant that they could be with other people. So co-working spaces have played a really important role in giving people workspaces that are away from their homes, people they can be around, good working spaces that maybe they didn't have access at home, and especially if they weren't part of an organization, and also to be able to access a co-located community. So really, really important. Now, what I wanted to share with you before we talk to today's main guest is a very short conversation that was actually recorded as part of a previous set of episodes. So late 2019, together with Shield GEO, we put together a series, a 7-episode series on connection and disconnection in remote teams. That's still there for you to listen to if you haven't done so already. And as part of this, Bree Caggiati, who basically put the episodes together, she talked to a lot of people, had some conversations, and then put together some little bits from the different conversations. And one of the conversations she had with one of her colleagues, Hundley, was all around how co-working had really helped Aisha feel less on her own, less lonely also, and even more connected to her colleagues. So I thought it'd be a really interesting start to the episode just to hear how having a co-working space to access can improve the experience of being a remote worker.
When I first joined Shield, there wasn't anyone else on my team who worked from a co-working space, besides the ladies who used to go into the office sometimes in London, but that's because, we have an office there. So I guess it never really occurred to me because I wasn't hearing about anyone on my team going on their own to get out and work from a co-working space. But my original thought was, when I started, was that in the summer I wasn't going to be able to work in my apartment because the temperatures in Madrid in the summer are almost at 40 degrees Celsius, and we live in an attic, and my office is upstairs, so it just was going to be physically impossible for me to be there working in July and August. I researched a few co-working spaces, and then I came here to this WeWork. And I was like, this is what I need to be. I need to be here a few days a week. And then once I started coming, I realized, how was I surviving, 40 hours a week in my apartment by myself?
Have you made friends in the co-working space? Because I know that they can also be quite isolating because you kind of go there, but you have no one to say hello to, but there's all these people around you. Are you able to have those chats and conversations in that space?
I honestly haven't really spoken to many people here in the co-working space because a lot of the people here too, I noticed that they're kind of in company, so they'll be in groups. So even though they're renting a hot desk, it's groups of people sitting together, working together as one company. So I haven't really spoken to that many people, but for me, it hasn't made much of a difference because it's just being in a professional environment, seeing other people working. And even though a lot of us don't speak to each other, we're very used to each other because we see the exact same people every single day. and I speak sometimes to the people in reception, and it's like all a community. It still feels like a community. And at the WeWork too, they have like networking events. They have happy hours on Thursdays. They have yoga, they have manicures, they have all these different things that you can sign up for if you want to learn about what everyone else in the community is working on. So it definitely does give you, if you're interested in that, it gives you a chance to like engage with other people.
Yeah, totally. So it sounds like for you, it was more about getting out of your space and being sort of physically isolated, that being near people, even if you're not having in-depth conversations and things like that, it's still affecting you in a positive way.
Yeah, it's just, I think, yeah, like getting out, not being physically isolated, and then also getting into, a routine of waking up in the morning and getting dressed and going to the office, so to speak. So it's been really helpful for me. And even though that wasn't the experience of other people on my team at the time, like the team that I'm on now, it's a similar thing. So some of them, they work at home some days and they go to the co-working space other days. I think honestly, it wasn't an experience on my other team because a lot of the ladies had children. And so just like the life space that they were in, they weren't like going and working to a co-working space and going out. They were staying at home and taking advantage of that and being with their kids. So that was probably the reason why it didn't occur to me earlier, because nobody around me was utilizing the same thing. But now that we have a lot more people on at Shield, I definitely feel like it's now a very common thing.
Yeah, it's really cool. Hey, like everyone's sort of able to decide what works for them and like the best place for them to be productive and feel like a person,
Yeah. And it's interesting too, like the experiences. I was speaking to Rosalind about the co-working space. She works in Barcelona, and she works at a co-working space that's, I think she said it's like 5 minutes from walking from her apartment. And she goes every single day to the co-work. She just needs that like routine. And she moved to Barcelona without knowing anyone there. And she says she's met so many great friends at the co-work, and it's like a family there. So it's really cool to hear other people's experiences too. And it makes me happy that they can do that if they choose. Because that's made literally a huge difference in her moving to a whole other country. That co-work is like giving her friends and like a family there. So that's so great.
That's definitely my experience too. I mean, I don't go every single day, but I go most often to my co-working space. And yeah, it's just nice to like see the same people every day and have someone to say hello to. And you don't really realize how much that makes a difference. I mean, my job in particular is quite insular. I don't really have to talk to anybody else in the company very often unless I'm doing something like this. So
right.
I think I could see myself getting quite isolated and feeling quite disconnected from the whole team if I let myself, But yeah, I think just having a space where you can say hello to someone is just like makes a total difference.
So thank you very much, Bree and Aisha, for agreeing to be present in this episode. It's a voice from a couple of years ago, but of course very relevant to today. So listeners, I would like now to introduce Bernie J. Mitchell, who has been on this show before, talking indeed about co-working spaces quite some time ago, when the focus of the show was broader than just remote work and online collaboration and leading remote teams. But I think it's a very important conversation to be having. If you haven't heard of co-working spaces before, which many people haven't, I lived in my own bubble and thought that everyone was aware of them, but of course not everyone has. These are basically spaces where sometimes you have a fixed desk, sometimes you turn up with your laptop, or other times they are big flexible offices which allow people from different organizations to mix. So this is a great alternative. Again, it won't be available for everyone because these co-working spaces exist. Well, they used to exist mainly in urban areas, but of course they are great spaces to have in rural areas to attract remote workers to them. So, Bernie has been in that space co-working for ages. He was a freelancer before. Now he leads a distributed team. So anyway, here's the conversation with Bernie. Bernie J. Mitchell, what are you known for, and what would you like to be known for?
Oh no, not that. I don't actually know what I'm known for. I did ask some people actually in an exercise, and two things that came back which were very unexpected. and I'm not as good as saying I'm known for world peace, is one, my friend Janine said, oh, you're known for getting people to show up to things when they're not quite sure why they're there. That's apparently a superpower. And also about, I'm the person a group of people go to for new gadgets, which made me feel way cooler than I am. Because I always know an app or a gadget, and I have been combing Product Hunt nonstop for like nearly 10 years. So I always know. And do you know AppSumo? So
yes, I don't use it, but yeah.
I'm known for those things. And then about this time last year, and I think I've said this to you before, I was the only person a lot of people knew who knew about co-working and knew about online remote working like you do. So I became the go-to person for co-working and remote working. So I sat in several webinars as the remote work expert, and hoping people like you wouldn't find out I was acting like that.
Oh, you have been working online for a very, very long time. Maybe you haven't thought about it as much as some of us, but you have been there. But before we start to talk about a lot of stuff, I just want to let listeners in on the joke, which is Bernie has been podcasting for a very, very long time, and you've started most of your shows with, what are you known for and what would you like to be known for? Which I think is a great question. So thank you for playing. I do know you as the person, all things co-working. You are the person who introduced me to that community, not necessarily to the concept of the spaces, but to that community. And I'm thinking, Bernie, that co-working is the missing piece in this whole conversation about going back to the office. And so I think it's really important that those people who've never heard of the concept, of whom there are many, to know that there are options when you're working away from your colleagues to being at home or being in the office. So what is your involvement in the co-working space right now, in the co-working space community, your involvements?
I'm part of a group called a self-organizing group called the European Coworking Assembly. It's a bunch of people who run co-working spaces or make software or applications or introduce concepts into co-working. And most of the people in it are independent co-working space operators. And they might own 9 co-working spaces and still call themselves a small business, or they might be a one-off thing, or there's people that do things like run co-working spaces in libraries and community centers. So there's like every type of thing going on there. And I am one of a group of people that started that going in London, and we just called it the London Coworking Assembly. And the 3 topics we're mainly focused on are it's like local co-working, rural co-working, because traditionally in London, a lot of the co-working density has been in the kind of Shoreditch, Silicone roundabout area. And then there's a concept called 15-minute city, which was, I mean, it's not a new thing, but it was 15-minute city tagline was invented by a Colombian professor who works in Paris called Carlos Moreno. And that is where you can be in a space. So I live in sunny Ilford in Essex, which is, hardly Santa Cruz or something like that. But everything is within 15 minutes reach, like walking or cycling. So we don't need to do a lot of traveling. And the other thing that is like huge, and even before George Floyd's murder last year, is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility in co-working. So there's this kind of cool idea of like, which I really encourage as well, which is like, let's all rock up and flip open our laptops and work on our cool businesses. But then there's all these other more serious things that contribute to the community, like in the co-working space and in the local community, and also the economic development of, people like you and me, Pilar, and also the economic development of the local area. Because when you spend £1 in a local business, it goes around 4 times. And when you spend £1 with a big company, it disappears off to a bank account somewhere.
So what's really interesting, and I think I wanted to highlight, and that's why I asked you to come here and talk about it, is this whole sense that there is a community around co-working, around people who use the space, but also around the people who run the spaces and support those spaces. It's not just, like you say, about providing a space where people can get their laptop and do work outside of the home, but you're also trying to do something with that community and also to change society in a way that, as you say, is more inclusive in different ways. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it sounds really easy to say, but it is. So pretty much for the past year, our group and local authorities in London have been talking around this kind of how do we do this, and the outer London boroughs, particularly if people listening outside of London, London's organised in zones. So the bit you see on TV is Zone 1, Buckingham Palace and stuff like that, and then Zone 6 is the outer zones. And for years, for most of the 20th century, people have commuted into London, and part of that was because that's how you got work. But then probably in the last 20 years, it's because they're just in the habit of doing that. And COVID just stopped everybody going. People weren't allowed to travel. So people that had to have people in the office because they thought that's how they controlled them were stuck. And people woke up and went, I don't know why I, go from Shenfield in Essex into Liverpool Street every day and work on the same online tools as I have at home, probably using the same computer. And there's definitely a magic to being in person, and some things you can only do in person, but a lot of our work can be done online and remotely. And there's a load of other stuff that goes with that. But the local authorities in 6, 5 and 4, those zones are like, oh my God, everyone's staying in our area and spending their money in our area. How can we keep them in our area?
I am so happy you went into that angle. So tell me a bit about, because I haven't really, I spoke to you not long ago, but it was mainly about podcasting, and then yesterday in the meetup, but I haven't spoken to you about this and the new co-working space and this concept of the 15-minute city. So what is the space that you are involved in right now? How are you involved? Yeah, and just tell us a bit about that development.
We can put a link in the show notes to a document called What If Everyone Could Walk to Work, which is essentially everything we're going to talk about in this podcast, by a company called Town Square, who even before COVID were opening co-working spaces in very unglamorous places like Wrexham, and they would take over a unit, get people to go and work in it, and also find ways that co-working space could connect with the local authorities, help local businesses, and all this type of stuff. That's going on there. And for a long time, I've been in a co-working space, not necessarily in London, but like I'd go into town. So I don't really go to like Zone 2 because I can get from my house there quite quickly, and then I can get into town if I need to. And then I just didn't want to travel at all. And then I looked around my local area and found this office called Workhive, which is opening a co-working space in it. And interestingly, the building's 100% capacity. Paul, who runs it, has just turned an area into a co-working space because he sees how that is a need that he can now serve. And it's a really diverse group of people and businesses in here. There's probably like 150 people in the building. And my life has gone from like this crazy me and my wife running out the door, arguing who's going to take our son to breakfast club because we need to be there from a certain time. And I just walk everywhere nowadays. That's the magic. I have more time physically and mentally. And the restriction, you know how quite often in creative circles, it's like, oh, if you have restrictions, it makes you more creative. Because my wife works in a hospital, I had to be the one to take our son to and from school, which is 9 till 3, because there was no after school club or breakfast club. So now my life is like walk to school with my son, come in here, which is seconds away. Doesn't always work, obviously, but like try and confine all my work between 9 and 3, which is still 6 hours of work, and then get out and go and pick him up afterwards. And life has just shifted. I don't mean that to sound like some Tony Robbins guru, but I would not have seen this possible if you'd been having this conversation like this time last year. It's just all been forced upon me, and I've had to work it out, and it works really well.
Excellent. And it's a great reminder that not everyone can work from home, not everyone might want to work from home, and that the only option is not having to commute into headquarters. And it's really been missed. And I'm so glad to hear you talk about the local authorities being involved. But we've heard a lot about how like the city centres have really suffered, of course, and especially places like the city in London, which have just had no one go there. So all the cafes and all the businesses that relied on all those people being there, they've really suffered. On the flip side is, of course, all the local communities that have this opportunity now to keep people around. And then we can spread that investment, and where we spend our pounds, we can spread that a bit more. So I'm really glad to hear local authorities seeing that.
They were craving about it anyway. And it's always been a topic. I suppose it's like when someone gives you a really good thing, someone gives you and me a really good podcasting rig, we can do even more. And now local authorities have, like, everybody has stopped commuting. There's a website called Boot the Commute. Mm-hmm. You put in like your journey and it shows how many hours you will get back if you work locally, and how much petrol you save, how many trees won't go, and all that type of stuff. So, I mean, one of the problems that local authority have is that so many people don't realise that they can work locally, and that they're kind of allowed to. And people don't know what a co-working space is. And like with every industry, in our little bubble, we're like, oh yeah, we'll be co-working. And interestingly, the word co-working outside of our little co-working bubble is seen as quite a privileged elitist thing. There's a Freelance Heroes Facebook group, and every so often Ed Goodman, who runs that, there's like 11,000 UK-based freelancers in there. And every time Ed puts in there, oh, what do you think of co-working? People will say, oh, it's like a privileged space for young white men doing startup things, and it's not seen as the sort of place that a 50-year-old female marketing consultant can go, or people of color feel like, oh, that's just for white guys to do their tech startup, isn't it? So I'm hoping what will happen is, with this push towards people being local, co-working spaces will become, not every co-working space will, but co-working spaces will become more of they'll serve the role that like the pub and the place of worship and the community centre used to serve, and there'll be somewhere where people can go and work.
And the beautiful thing is that it is also quite a diverse space in the fact that you can find different types of co-working spaces. So when you think of the big places, which are essentially the high-end financial-wise, so the places where you have to pay more money, like WeWork and places like that, which are one kind of experience. And then you have the Workery, which is the co-working space I've been using for a while, which is a very do-it-yourself space where you just go in, you have 24-hour access, and you have to make your own coffee. There's no free biscuits, but hey, it's a really lovely space that it's away from the house, right to other kind of spaces. And I think as well that co-working spaces, you can, if you are fortunate enough to have 2 or 3 that are not too far away from you, or that you can go to with public transport, because sometimes we do want to travel somewhere, but it's just a place that we have chosen because that fits us. You can actually look for an environment that will suit you and a community that will suit you.
You can, definitely. When people think of co-working, it's a bit like hotels. Oh, do you know a hotel? Hilton. And I'll just go, where are we going? Oh, we're going to like this place in Finland. Let's go to a Hilton because it's too much effort to look for anything else. But then if all the independent co-working spaces stood up at the same time, they would outnumber things like Regus and Rework right away. And what happened I don't know, I haven't got an exact figure, but there were many cases where people who had contracts and memberships in places like WeWork, all their free beer and their yoga things and everything else that was going on, which was included in the membership, they weren't allowed to use those facilities. And this time last year, no one really knew what to do should we open, shall we close, what's going on? And people said, hey, you're going to freeze my membership because my gym froze my membership. Why aren't you going to freeze your membership? And they're like, well, you can still come in and use your office. Well, but what about all the other stuff? Well, you can't use that. It's not available. But I'm paying through the nose to have all that stuff. So are you going to give me a discount, or am I going to be allowed to get that? And people actually took some of these companies to court. And I don't know if they won or not. I mean, obviously, I'd love it if they did. But people ended up with having arguments over contracts with the bigger companies, whereas smaller companies, where there's a feeling of community and ownership and actually connection with the owner or the community manager, a lot of people kept on paying to keep the community alive because it was beyond the physical space. And pretty much every co-working space tried to do something online, and some failed dismally and some just, I know Alex Hillman, who Indie Hall has just exploded online during the pandemic. So they still have their physical space with restricted access, but the online Indie Hall community is something to be reckoned with now.
That is really, I continue to pay my membership just because I think, well, if not, the place won't be there also when I get back. And it was that connection. I wasn't using the space. I think also it's very interesting for organizations, anyone listening who can have a say in how the going back to the office looks like, to find out about these places. And in the same way as individuals, we will go beyond the things that we hear about. Okay, what else? And what else is there? And what else is near where some of our people live? And what else is halfway through that journey that people are used to doing? And really understand that ecosystem so that it can support the experience that we want our people to have.
There's a lot of things that we've seen in the pandemic which seem to be new conversations, and they've been going on for ages. So a co-working Europe in 2017, bigger companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst & Young were coming along to find out what this co-working thing is. And that's because there were other companies, not those two, but they were looking that their real estate managers were coming to see how they could get into co-working so they could reduce their real estate portfolio. So if they, over the next 5 years, they were going to let go of a load of real estate, and then they didn't know what their workforce was going to look like, but they needed to find ways for their workforce to work more locally. And a lot of the stuff we just discussed in this podcast is, so, why do we make people go from Bristol to Birmingham every day when we could just, do it online? So it was already happening. And I'm sure you've heard this as you've been around the last 18 months, is the COVID accelerated the future of work conversation by 10 years. I was actually, and I don't mean to sound like a pedantic idiot, but I was amazed at how many people this time last year didn't know how to do an online call, or they were they just didn't know you could get Zoom on your phone or things like that. And I just assumed, which is a horrible thing to do, that everyone knew how to do that, and they didn't.
Yeah, I run some workshops in an organization and talking about all this stuff, and of only one person in 20 in different groups had come across the concept. And you're thinking, well, there's never been a need. There's never been a need for the person who goes from their home to the office and mixes with the same people to even know why would they hear about co-working. So I think that it's it's important that we get this conversation out there now that it's useful, now that there is a need for it, for people to understand that. The other thing that I'm really keen, Bernie, is to look at with you is, so there's one thing, which is the co-working spaces and the fact that they're there and everything that exists around it, and the fact that it's not just also a place to go to work, it's also a place where your people, if we were talking organization or freelancers, can mix with other people from outside the organization, which I think is really important. At the same time, I think there's a lot of conversations that people who run the space or people involved in co-working spaces, you're having a lot of conversations that are very useful for people who are starting to reconsider how to use the office. And this is from things like the importance of community, the importance of being that connector between people who use the space as well. So I wonder whether you would mind sharing some of the conversations that you're currently having with your co-working buddies that could be of interest to people, whether they're using the co-working space or not, but they just want their employees to have a better experience wherever they're working from.
There's so many. I'm nearly kind of fatigued at the back to the office conversation, because I feel like people who are promoting the back to the office conversation are heavily invested in people getting back into their buildings rather than like what's good for the thing. And there was that, I haven't read it yet, but I noticed the tagline. There's an article you shared on LinkedIn the other day that I think it was in The Guardian. It was about, we don't need to talk about getting back to the office. We need to talk about how it actually works.
Mm-hmm.
And that nailed it for me. And I was part of a online conference which has been going since 2004 called Workplace Trends, which I'm sure you've come across.
Mm-hmm.
And I was intrigued that everyone in there was not so much talking about should we go back to the office. It was about how we're going to work and whether we actually need to be where we are. And it was a bit more ahead of like lines like work is where you are and stuff like this. It was like, how does this actually play out in real life? And, you know, the whole, when I say the whole workforce, but the whole workforce, mainly who works in a computer and needs to go to the office, has caught up with this. Organizations have been forced into using, Trello instead of Post-it notes and Zoom instead of meeting rooms. And it's about two things that have come out is, most people still would like to be able to go to an office, and there's all these reports I've seen. Basically, it's like across the board, it's like 70% of people want choice and autonomy. So when they wake up in the morning or when they plan their week, it's like, okay, I need to go to the office to see my workmates, but I would like to be able to work from home or work from a local co-working space or whatever you want to call it, or for a local cafe. I want autonomy over my work life. And I don't know what the other 30% did, but it's not like we all should. It's not a office or not. It's we'd like a choice. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is about how I'm trying to think how to say it. Yeah, how a local workspace represents itself. In the spaces I know, they would welcome anybody, and the spaces I've been in that are the best are a mixture of people, because it's really interesting for me to sit down opposite someone who's not in my industry. Mm-hmm. And they'll say something, kind of go, oh yeah, I was trying to do it this way, but Jack from the sharp nut making company does it this way, and mixing, meeting with a diverse group of people. Because in this building, there's recruitments, there's web designers, there's import-export companies, there's surveyors, and they're all like, very local, and it's just very interesting. So the way co-working spaces communicate themselves, because they all think they need to be like WeWork, and they all think they need to be attracting cool, startup-y, creative people, but actually everyone needs somewhere to work. There's some more to come there, but I'm going to take a breath.
Well, I can share my thought with you while you take a breath, which is that this is also a conversation that we've seen in traditional workspaces as well, that people want to project themselves as X or as Y rather than looking at the organization from within and go, okay, what are we about and what is the experience we really want to give our people? Not the experience that I'm going to name Google is giving their people, because they are always the point of reference, but who are we? What do we value? And what do we want people to feel when they are with us? Forget about everyone else. What happens when they're with us?
The bulk of my career over the last at least 5 years has been helping co-working spaces communicate and market and run events and do stuff, get their websites organized. And the amount of times I've sat down with someone and they're going, and they can't get through. It's like when you're having marketing conversations and people go, oh, I want to do it like Apple. Everyone says, I want to be Apple. And there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I've read a lot of books like that, but everyone's like, I want to be Apple, but you're a pop-up burger stall in Hackney, what's the Apple bit you're looking for there? And what they really mean is they want like clean and profitable communication, I think. But co-working spaces go, oh, I want to be like WeWork. And they think they want to be like WeWork because WeWork seems to be really big and successful. But actually, why you want to be like them, other than they appear to be doing really well, even though they're not. And people connect well with a local cafe that's run by human beings. or even when you go to a Starbucks, you have a relationship with, if you go there a lot, you have a relationship with the baristas rather than the Starbucks. For me, that's the bit that really matters. So if you go to a local co-working space and someone introduces you to people and you build a relationship there, you get that kind of like human security and connection that is probably more important and we crave in our post-pandemic society than we did before.
And I think the other reason why people tend to think of WeWork as the place is because we're still attached to what work looks like and what the place where I go to work looks like.
Yep.
So we're still thinking, okay, if I can't have my flashy office because that's what I should have, then I can have a WeWork, which is the similar thing. And again, I think for organizations, there's also an opportunity to decide how they want their workplace to look like, or to let it evolve, because now, of course, is an opportunity for that, because we're going to have people starting to use the office again. The use, especially during still pandemic times, is going to be different. So let's see what people really gravitate towards. Let's see what they're missing. Let's see what they need and listen to them while they are in the office. And one thing that they might realize is that actually, and you said this in, I think it was a newsletter you sent through after your co-working symposium and the workplace trends research summit, you said that what people were missing was not the office, but the people in the office. So there might be other ways of fulfilling that need that don't involve having huge spaces that we need to use all the time, etc. So I think this is also part of, is now time to evolve the conversation. What is a workplace? What should our workplace look like?
Oh, I think that's like, do you know Neil Usher?
Yes, I met him once very quickly in a conference, yeah.
I've been hanging on his every word like a fanboy. But both him and his wife for years, because he's all the things we talk about like this now, he brought up, like I think it was about 8 years ago I met him, and people would get very excited about their this and this and this. And whenever he's at an event, I always go, "What's the future of work, Usher?" And he says, "It's now." Because people were like, and that annoys people because they're like, "But what do you mean, Neil? What do you mean now?" He goes, "Like, why are you panicking about?" I mean, you have to have a long-term idea of where you're going and goals and strategy and stuff like that. But like panicking about what the future of work is going to be, I think that's another, along with all the economic and health devastation that the COVID has brought, is people have been like snapped back into where they are now. Our past and our future are just like ideas, and being where we are now, even in this conversation or this day, Pilar, is what's going on, is what's important now. And I know little time for whether we're going to have flying cars or not. I'm not worried about, but I'm interested in what we're doing now. Yeah.
Excellent. So anything else that we want to know about the co-working space for listeners that have joined us just today?
The only bit I want to like shout out here is there's a guy called Scott Galloway, who's a business professor at NYC University, and he's got this great book called Post Pandemic, which is basically like a collection of blog posts and ideas, but it's a standalone. I'd say it's a report actually, and in it he points out that most of the jobs that are over $100,000 a year, because it's just a US based thing, can be done from a computer. So people like you and me who can work from a computer are kind of fine and don't need to worry. And it's all the people that earn less than $30,000 a year are going to be devastated, because both you and me at least know how to work from home, and we have an internet connection, and we have a device. We can use a laptop, but we're coherent enough to know that we can do stuff from our mobile phone too. It's not convenient, but it's and that's something that when we talk about work, everyone's assuming, maybe it's just because of where I pay attention, everyone's like, let's go back to the office. But there's loads of people who aren't privileged enough to have that office conversation or even have a choice where they are to work. So I don't know where that fits into what we're doing, but I think that's something to consider as well.
I think it's really important to remember that we are talking about a specific sector of society, and what we're doing is giving a specific sector of society some more autonomy, some more choice, etc., etc. And what we've got to be looking, and this is the third conversation I've had in the last 24 hours about this, so that's good, is that we need to look at those sectors of society which cannot have the independence around location, which brings us autonomy, etc., which brings us also a sense of community in some cases. We need to look at those jobs that do not have location independence and see how we can give those people more autonomy, either by giving them more choice around how they do their chores, the tasks, their work, around schedule, if that's possible. And it can be the smallest things about what they wear. I don't know. But it's really, really important that thing that we don't forget about the other sector of society. Of course, you and I, Bernie, and listeners to the show, our radars and our networks are in that space. So that's where we're giving the focus. But I think we always have to be very mindful of this. Yeah. So listeners, you can find out everything about Bernie, and you can sign up to his newsletter also. His reflections at the end of each week, really, really worth reading, over at berniejmitchell.com. And there you can find links to his podcasts as well. So I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on co-working or other remote options that don't involve working from home. Or if working from home is your preferred way of working remotely, then I'd love to hear from you. And indeed, if you know that you're at your happiest and give your best work when you're in an office with your team members and other people, then I would love to hear from you too. There is not one way of cracking this, which is why we need to keep the conversation going, understanding what the different types of work locations offer us, what we need as individuals, so we can bring the best to the team, and what helps our team produce the best work and the happiest work. So, of course, you can subscribe to the show on your podcast app, 21st Century Work Life, in whatever podcast app you use. We're on everything. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter, which has reading and listening recommendations, plus a digest of our own content. And you can do that over at virtualnotdistant.com. And as you do that, you will be able to download a free guide on leading through visible teamwork. So a good one for especially people who haven't had the time to yet think about how they're going to lead a remote team sustainably. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Our Twitter account is Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O. I am at Pilar Orti on Twitter. Would love to be connected. And my email address is pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode on co-working. And if you have any questions, do send them through. And if you have any questions or comments for Bernie, do send them through. Thank you very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.